Thank you for joining us here at Dominion Church. I'm so glad that you are tuning in. If you're on Facebook, go ahead and like and share this so others can be blessed as a result. Maybe you're on YouTube at Dominion Church SC. Like, share so you can get notifications when we post new videos. Maybe you're listening on the Dominion Church podcast experience. The point is you're with us, you are tracking with us, and we're so grateful for that. I would also love for you to do me a favor. Come be a part of one of our corporate gatherings. We meet here at 1 o'clock p.m. on Sunday at the historic Taylor Mill. We'd love for you to come be a part of one of our corporate gatherings. I really believe it'll be a blessing to you. I want to share a message today that I believe is going to be a blessing to you. It's something at this point that I've had the chance to minister outside the house a couple of times, and this is the first time actually bringing it to Dominion, and I thought it was appropriate being at Thanksgiving. And so what we're going to be talking about today is the enemy's table. The enemy's table. And I believe this is just going to be a blessing. And so I'm just going to jump into it. I'm going to go through this. I don't believe this is going to take a long time today because I'm more and more buying into it. I know some of the people that have been here long term, you're probably thanking God at this point, that I believe that when there's something that's weighty, it's probably better to take less time to say it than to draw it out. And so it's more of the kind of like dropping a grenade, and then you walk away from it and you just let it do what it's supposed to do. And so I want to jump into this. So Psalm 23, verse 5, we have this verse that is written by our father David. And this is a verse that I grew up hearing, and I'm sure you've heard it as well. Psalm 23, verse 5, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. And so, David, it's interesting. There are many times when he writes songs that he doesn't quite know how to finish them. He doesn't quite know how to finish them. And I also honor and admire the connection between Jesus and David. Jesus refers to David as his father. And if you just go back, and we can't reteach the life and story of David, but it's beautiful to go and to think about and to walk through. A passionate man, I know growing up was probably one of my favorite biblical figures. I mean, how could you as a man, as a young boy, not appreciate David? Slaying giants, slaying bears and lions, but he also has this side that is a songwriter and musician, right? But a king and a warrior, a worshiping warrior, as I like to call him. But there are times where when he's writing his songs that he needs some help getting them finished. And I believe this is one of those encounters because David begins a psalm that only Jesus knew how to finish. And this isn't the only time that Jesus would correct songs written by his father David. Psalm 22 is probably my favorite one. I've shared that here before. Psalm 22 begins, my God, why have you forsaken me? And so David is writing this song, and we find out later that it's a messianic psalm, and it's the same psalm that Jesus quotes when he's on the cross about to die. He cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he does it for the benefit of the audience that's there. Because if they knew the writings of anyone, they knew the writings of King David. Why? Because he was their most celebrated historical king. He brought a greater expansion of the nation of Israel than any king before him or after. And so if they knew anything, they knew the Psalms. So Jesus was not confessing that God had forsaken him. He was telling his audience, go and read this messianic song that my father David wrote. And then somewhere in Psalm 22, if you go and read it, there's a big shift. And where first it starts where David is crying out for help, it shifts to the focus is on the Lord. And so Jesus finishes the song that his father didn't know how to finish, David. And I believe this is another one. So again, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. When I grew up, I'd read this and I would imagine myself. So here in the sanctuary, we've got a long table over here. So I would imagine I would sit down at that table and the Lord would bless me. And the reason he would bless me was to humiliate my enemies. Right? Come on, that's what I thought. right or wrong. He's going to bless me so much that my enemies are going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that he's being so blessed by his Father. That's just how I thought. And honestly, I don't know exactly what David thought either. But usually when David would talk about his enemies, it was in very extreme terms, right? Because it's the songs of David where we get what we call the imprecatory prayers. He would sing songs about breaking the teeth of his enemies. He would ask the Lord, break the teeth out of their mouths, pull out their fangs, don't allow their children to take their seats of power. So not only would he say, deal with my enemies, but he'd say, wipe out their lineage. That's hardcore. But is that the heart of God? See, that's the question that we have to ask, and it's a hard question. And so I want to submit, Jesus goes and he starts finishing the song of his father David. And this is how the song goes, Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 45. You have heard it was said, you will love your enemy, you would love your neighbor rather, and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. So David is singing, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Jesus says, listen, you've been told love your neighbor, hate your enemies, but I say love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be the sons of your Father who is in heaven. So now think about the table again now. You're sitting at the table, your enemies are there. So what do we pray for? Do we pray for God's blessing to overtake us so our enemies can be humiliated? Or do we start praying for our enemies and showing them love and compassion? And could it be that the extravagant blessing of God is not just so we can have the corner market on blessing, but so that we're so blessed that we share the blessing? That's a shift in narrative right there. But we also need to continue along the thought, because if we need an enemy's table, because I feel like a lot of us feel like we need one. If we need an enemy's table, let's talk about who truly are the enemies of God. Now standing here saying that, and for those watching, that's risky because we're all on different pages. Maybe after this recent election, you're convinced that the enemies are Democrats. So that must be the enemies. Well, or maybe it's Muslims, because, right? Maybe it's homosexuals. They're the enemies of God. Well, let's look at Romans chapter 5, verse 10. For if, while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his son, how much more, having been reconciled, will we be saved through his life? Now, when Paul wrote this in Romans 5, it did have historical context, and it certainly applied, but I believe it also applies today. Who are the enemies of God? Well, Paul would say we were. Well, we were the enemies of God. Not just who I want labeled as an enemy. We all were enemies of God. Now, I'm gonna give us some clarity here. I'm going to help us. Colossians 1:15, we've got to read this verse. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. If there's anything we believe about God that doesn't look like Jesus, we're missing something. And so when Jesus finishes the song of his father David, and this is how he says it, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, that has always been the heart of God. I don't care that David wrote, break their teeth in their mouth. Just because he wrote it doesn't mean it accurately represents the heart of God. The heart of God is love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. So then Colossians 1 verse 19, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, Jesus, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. And then look at verse 21. This verse, I promise you, has been in your Bible your whole life. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. Pause right there. So when we talk about the enemy's table, we have to be careful, Because like I said, again, we want to label enemies. Well, those are my enemies, so that's where they're going to sit. They're going to sit on that side of the table because they're enemies and I'm a friend. Well, Paul would say we all were alienated from God. We all were enemies. How? In our own minds. Because of what? Because of our own evil behavior. So our behavior reflected what we believed about God. And we were taught things about God that simply were not true. That he's vindictive, that he's judgmental, that he's waiting. He's waiting for us to mess up. He's waiting for us to do something wrong so that he can judge us accordingly. Verse 22, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. So can I say it this way? We all, when we first met God, we met him as an enemy. Not on his part, but on ours. God has no enemies. He has no enemies. And if I believe I'm supposed to reflect his character and nature, I don't have enemies either. Now, I may have people that posture themselves as an enemy, and I'm not trying to just trick us by what I'm saying. I'm trying to tell you that if you love your enemy, it's hard for them to stay your enemy. Typically, the enemy dynamic comes from resistance. It comes from, okay, you pull out your sword, I'll pull out mine. Now we are enemies. But if one pulls out their sword and the other one says, you can cut me down, but I'm going to bless you. You can take my life, but I'm still going to love you. I'm going to pray for you. Kind of like some of the encounters, if you've ever read Fox's Book of Martyrs, when I was growing up, I'd read that, and I was so amazed at these encounters where people who are being tormented for the cause of the gospel, yet they would bless the people taking their lives. They would sing songs to the Lord. It's like they still had joy. It's hard to have that joy when we posture ourselves as enemies against others, right? So we all, if you don't hear anything else from this word today, we all first approach God as an enemy. Not on his part, but on ours. I love this quote by Blaise Pascal. Jesus came to tell men that they have no enemies but themselves. Jesus came to tell men they have no enemies but themselves. And that so reflects what we read in Colossians earlier. Once you were alienated from God, you were enemies in your own minds because of your evil behavior. Could it be that the greatest enemy any of us struggles with is not the enemy who we consider our neighbor, it's the enemy that is ourselves? The things we make up about God. And so when we make up something, we have to reflect what we make up, right? So my family and I, we were able to spend a couple days up in Tennessee, and we love going up there, and I can't wait to go up there for many more years to come. But you've literally got a storefront. So I mean, I have to believe if you can sell it, somebody's buying it. If nobody's buying it, you're not going to sell it. But you literally would see things like Jesus holding a sword, a Bible draped in an American flag, and he bleeds the red, white, and blue. I mean, I do believe he loves America, but he's not an American. And I don't believe that because we believe he's draped in the red, white, and blue, that anyone who hates America, that now Jesus hates them. That's not how it works. He has no enemies. Come on. Anyone who approaches it as an enemy is someone who has met him for the first time. And it's not because he's their enemy. It's because we approach him as an enemy. Anytime mankind sees the goodness, the mercy, and the compassion of God on display, our default response is we want to kill him. We want to kill God. I'm telling you. We laugh about it, but it's true. Think about it. The last time you encountered a believer who just oozed love, oozed the goodness of God, and you're trying to argue with them. And all they do is just have a smile on their face, and you're not going to be able to argue with them. Why? Because they're just releasing the goodness of God. I know people like that. And sometimes you just want to slap them upside the head. Why are you so full of compassion? Why are you so full of love? And if we're not careful, it's showing us who we are. God's table is uniquely designed to welcome and nourish his enemies. So when you come to the table of the Lord as an enemy, he invites you to sit down and eat. Isn't that something? Oh, only God. But he invites us to the same lifestyle. So can I say it this way? And this is a profound thought. There's only one table. You can call it the table of his enemies. That's fine. He has no enemies, so we're going to have to change the name of the table. So let's just call it the Lord's table. And everyone is welcome. Son, friend, enemy, orphan. God prepares a table. And the challenge is, come and taste and see that I am good. And if I can see him, I can be like him. The problem is many of us, we're offering an image of God that reflects our improper beliefs about him. And so we don't have anything really to offer in the terms of tasting unless it's something that's sour and off. Now, if you truly offer Jesus as he is, there's no greater taste. Come on, y'all know what I'm talking about. So now to shift gears and to finish out what I'm talking about, I want to talk about a couple enemies of God, a couple of enemies. So the first one we're going to talk about is Saul. Not King Saul, although we could talk about King Saul as well, but I want to talk about Saul. We know him better by his Gentile name, Paul. Saul is his Jewish name, and I'm sure his parents named him with pride after King Saul. I'm sure they did. But it's only, again, God's wonder-working power that causes the world to know him by his Gentile name. Because he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. You'd think if there was any pride in any of his names, it'd be in the name of Saul. But the name Paul is who we know him by, the most familiar. So let's talk about Saul for a minute. Acts chapter 9, verse 1, this is how we meet him. Could you imagine that this is how somebody meets you? But Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples. That's the introduction. Here's this guy named Saul, breathing threats and desires to murder the disciples of Saul. So this is not a good guy. You don't want to invite this guy to lunch, okay? Because if he finds out you're a follower of the way, he already has a warrant signed. All he has to do is write your name on it. That's it. He doesn't have to call up the judge. He doesn't have to have a court date. What's your name again? Oh, it's Frank. All right, give me 1 second. Frank. And then, guys, take him into custody right now. I've got the warrant. He goes to the high priest. He goes to Caiaphas. He asks him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus so that if he found any belonging to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now, as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him, and falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. So Saul, when he first encounters God, he encounters him as an enemy. Not on God's part, but on his. And so what does God do? He brings revelation to Saul that he never had entertained before. And y'all have heard me teach on this, but we've got to go through with it. What was the first revelation? He never connected that Jesus lived in the people that he was going after. They weren't just following Jesus, but Jesus was living on the inside. And so that's the Hollywood version. Acts chapter 9 is the Hollywood version. Galatians 1 is the documentary version. And I'm praying, I'm asking the Lord, I really want to do this one day. It's going to take some money to do it. But I want to set it up like we're talking to the Apostle Paul. Like get a good actor, have him sitting in like a modern chair, though, modern lighting and all that. But he's telling this encounter from his perspective. And so the documentary version, Galatians 1, starts in verse 13. Now, if we could, really what we should is have these verses side by side so you can see how well they track. So here we go. Imagine Paul now. At this point, he's a lot more humble than he was in Acts chapter 9. And so this is how he starts. Well, y'all have heard of my days, my previous days and my way of life in Judaism, how I intensely persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. Remember how we met him? But Paul still breathing threats and murder. So y'all remember. Verse 14, I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. Let's stop right there. Can you hear this right now in your spirit? If there's one thing scarier than Saul being empowered by the law to go and persecute the church, to me, what is scarier than that is this. According to Galatians 1, he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. Do you hear that right now? He said, I did this. I was advancing in Judaism. In other words, religion gave me its stamp of approval. I was zealous for the traditions of my fathers. But then look at verse 15. But when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb, called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me. So there's two levels of revelation. The first was he didn't realize Jesus lived in the people he was going after. The second revelation was he didn't realize Jesus was living in him also. Now I get that. We got to ponder that. Because the questions are, well, when did he pray the sinner's prayer? Well, I don't have that information. Well, who led him down the Romans road? Well, he hadn't written Romans yet, so good luck with that. He said it pleased God to reveal that Jesus was in him. Maybe we've gotten salvation just all twisted up. We approach God as an enemy, and what does he first do? He reveals, well, I'm in you. So if you want to be an enemy, that's fine, but I'm in there. So good luck. You want to run, but I'm with you. I can't leave you or forsake you. I'm in there. Right? And so salvation, I believe a more accurate picture is awakening to his appearing, awakening to his likeness, awakening to the seed that has already been planted. And so we facilitate awakening. That's what evangelism is. It's facilitating awakening. It's offering an encounter with the character and nature of Jesus. And so I understand. So we default to formula because we want to be able to measure our successes. But what Jesus does, so the formula in his day is not very different from the formula of today. The formula of his day, get locked into a religious system, make sure that you meet all the requirements, and if you do that, you can be in the club, and one day you'll be approved. What does Jesus do? He drops this hand grenade of relational intimacy into the whole system. And he says, my way is not the way of religion. My way is not the way of politics. My way is the way of the table. My way is the way of passing the bread and the wine. My way is the way of relational intimacy. With that in mind, let's talk about another enemy. I always think about Judas. If there's a few names that pop up in biblical infamy, and Judas, I would think, is the top dog, really. Nobody wants to be Judas. But I think about Judas. The name Judas means praise. It's the same name of Judah. Same name. And so I believe that when Judas's parents named him, they named him with pride. They named him after the tribe that they knew in terms of messianic prophecy, Jesus, the Messiah, the lion would come from this tribe. So can you picture baby Judas? And his parents are introduced. This is Judas, and oh, that's a beautiful name. We hope the Messiah is going to come quickly. So I don't believe for a minute that Judas had always had in his heart the desire to betray Jesus. I just don't believe it. I don't buy into it. I don't think you could fake it for 3.5 years that, hey, I'm finally gotten to his inner circle now. I'm going to betray this guy. I don't believe it. Actually, if you go and you read Scripture, you find out there was a defining moment that turned Judas's heart. And it was when the woman with the alabaster box poured out that extravagant offering on the feet of Jesus. And it says after that, Judas thought in his heart, hey, we could have taken care of some people with that. We should have sold that. And an offense started growing in his heart. And we're even told scripturally he did not know that gift was to serve as Jesus' preparation for burial. He didn't know. And of course, the disciples, Judas wasn't the only one who didn't believe that. Many of Jesus' disciples did not believe that he would die. Many of them. Peter was the chief among them. Believed that no one's going to take your life. I'll kill him myself. Oh, Peter. And so they're there in the Last Supper, the Feast of Passover, observing Seder, the Seder meal. We always focus on the bread and the wine, and rightly so, but there was more going on than just bread and wine. And so there comes a time where Jesus gives the directive, let's take the bread and we're going to take the cup. But also as a Seder tradition, when you take the bread, you would dip it. You dip it in, King James says, the sop. Dip it in the sop. That doesn't sound appetizing to me whatsoever. It sounds too much like slop. That's what I think. I think of slop. But sop in ancient Near Eastern tradition, it was more probably fish sauce is probably what it was. And that makes sense because these are fishermen, after all, that Jesus is leading this revolutionary ragtag group of fishermen for the most part, tent makers, tax collectors. And so they would take the bread, tear it, dip it in the sop, dip it in the fish sauce. So Jesus has already said, whoever dips with me will betray me. When I was reading that, are you guys like me? I was so confused. How could Judas still do that? Jesus told, if you do it, you're going to betray me. I would have sat on my hands. Nope, Nope. I would have tucked them under my armpits. No way. There's no way I'm going to dip with Jesus. But he dips with Jesus. Now, there's something I really would love to flesh out. I don't know how far I can go with it, but I believe this speaks of a couple things. But one thing perhaps we haven't considered is this. Jesus created such a connection of transparency amongst his disciples that even if they wanted to betray him, they felt free to admit it. What do you think about that? Whoever dips with him, he's going to betray me. And Judas felt so comfortable in that moment. Well, I want to betray him. Dip. No need to hide it. Man, could you imagine if we had that kind of leadership dynamic in local churches where you felt so free that your lead pastor said, okay, listen, this is how this meeting is going to go. If you want to betray me, just go ahead and say it and you're free to do it. And then what's amazing is that when Judas dips with Jesus, Jesus does not rebuke him. It says that Judas basically rebuked himself. Man, there's a lot to go into with all this, and we just can't do it. But it's in Seder tradition, when you would dip the bread into the sauce, into the sop, you did not eat it yourself. You would dip, and you would hand it to somebody that you loved. Now, can you see the picture? The hand of Jesus, the hand of Judas goes into the same bowl, and Jesus turns to Judas and gives him to eat. Basically, I know you're going to betray me. Everyone at this table knows you're going to betray me, but I still love you. Jesus has no enemies. We all approach God first as an enemy, not on his part. but on ours. See, you begin to realize you can't have an enemy if your heart is to love those that persecute you. Or I like to say this, you can't be my enemy if I want you to win. You can't be my enemy if I love you. The only way you can be my enemy is if you have caused me to somehow set myself against you, and I refuse. I'm not going to do it. I love this quote by Richard Rohr. Everything he says is a mouthful, so just give me a moment. Religion has in fact outdone culture in dualistic thinking. We've become as violent, as hateful towards our enemies, damning them to hell and whatever else, that the world doesn't even look to us for wisdom because we're trapped in the dualistic mind instead of the mind of Christ that we're supposed to have. Wow. The world laughs at us because we have become just as judgmental as they have. And it's no surprise, before you think the church takes its cues from the world, you need to flip that around. The world has taken its cue from the church. The enemy's table is the only table. We call it the Lord's table. And I guess we feel like, well, depending on what side I'm on, that would depend on if I'm an enemy or not. No, we all first came to him as an enemy. Not on his part, but on ours. And so the challenge is that he's ever reaching out to us. He's ever engaging us. He's ever feeding us. He's ever challenging us. If you will just taste and see, you'll see that who you believe that I was is not who I am. The hostility that's in your mind, I want to help you with that. I want to purge you of a guilty conscience. The greatest guilt any of us carries is not connected to personal behavior. I found more and more, some of the guilt that I entertain is what I used to believe about God. Because there are times, I tell you, pray for me, there are times where I play over in my mind things I used to believe about God. Things I used to say about God. Things I used to preach about God. I look back now and I'm like, what was I thinking? That's never who God was. And if you're not careful, you start feeling really bad. Like, am I even worthy? You even feel like Paul. You know, he said towards the end of his life, I'm not even worthy to be called an apostle because of my persecuting the church. So, Lord, we just thank you now. We thank you for the table of the Lord. The next couple of weeks, we're going to be here in America. We're going to be observing Thanksgiving. We're going to find ourselves at some pretty interesting tables. There's no table like the table of family. There's no table like the table of friends and family because, you know, it just gets interesting. But Lord, just help us to have that posture of no matter where we find ourselves, even at the Thanksgiving table, that we reflect your heart in nature. For some of us, it's just going to be so radically different. You know, if Thanksgiving for you know there's going to be an argument coming. With sister so-and-so and cousin so-and-so, they're going to argue. Why don't you be that voice, that voice of unconditional love, that voice of forgiveness and compassion? Where are the sons and daughters who will offer the living bread? The sons and daughters who will offer the living wine. Lord, I just thank you. Lord, let our thanksgiving precede us. That heart of thanksgiving, that heart that comes from a wellspring of restoration. I will not allow you to be my enemy because I love you. I pray for you. I forgive you. You know, along that same line, we could go down these roads of restorative justice. That's something that's been on my heart a lot lately. The reason most of us prefer punitive justice over restorative justice is because restorative justice requires that we walk in forgiveness concerning those who hurt us. We'd much rather see people punished for their wrongdoing than to see God restore both the victim and the perpetrator. But that is the heart of God. He doesn't choose sides. And so, Lord, I just thank you that even in that, you show us what true restoration looks like. You show us what it means to be overcome by your goodness, overcome by your unconditional one-way love. So I just thank you for that. Let that be what marks our Thanksgiving celebration this year. Being overcome by your goodness, that we might reflect it to everyone that we encounter. Lord, I thank you for all these things now, decree them by faith in the strong and mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. Well, God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, like and share this so that others can be blessed as a result. And come see us for one of our corporate gatherings. We'd love for you to come and be a part of it. God bless you. Have an amazing week, and we'll see you next time.